So, one of our pioneers, Susan, made the mistake of asking a really good question. As punishment for asking this really good question, we're going to record her asking the question and ask Craig to answer it. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, Craig, I've been thinking about this a lot. So, Bitcoin got slow at scale. It was fast at first, but as you get more and more computers mining in the network, how come the Gajumaru isn't going to get slow? And you've got 100 million, a billion computers mining, and they all have to agree what the blockchain ledger says, and they all have to sync up. And I think you guys are saying that it'll do 300 transactions
Per second.
per second. Won't the world's financial, transactions greatly exceed that? And won't things start to take 10 minutes to write onto the blockchain?
That is a good question, and the answer is kind of fun. So the Bitcoin, the way Bitcoin works is we've already established kind of the puzzle thing, right? You've got all the kids in class are doing their jigsaw puzzle. The property of the jigsaw puzzle is that it's hard to solve, but it's very easy to prove. You can just glance at it and go, "Yep, that's solved," right? So they're all competing together to do this. In the Bitcoin model, when you submit a transaction to the chain, you're putting it into the mempool. So that's shared across all nodes because nobody knows who's going to be the next leader. So everybody's inbox gets a copy of whatever transaction you submitted. So everyone's got visibility on that, which means all these puzzle solvers have visibility on that. As they are doing the puzzle solving work, their inbox is stacking up and they're evaluating simultaneously. They are evaluating those transactions to see which ones are going to pay them the best if they include them in the block. And I say the block because Bitcoin has one block. It's got the puzzle proof and a stack of transactions with it, all wrapped up together and signed by that leader. And it's published all at once, boop, when it goes out to the world. That happens once every so many minutes. The maximum number of transactions that can fit into a block in Bitcoin is predetermined. You cannot exceed this, that's how you get the number, how many transactions per second is how many transactions can fit into a block across how many minutes it takes to create that block. That's also why if you submit a transaction to Bitcoin, it does not get processed right away. It never has actually from the beginning. So like when Bitcoin was first released, you were always going to have to wait for the next block before your transaction could come out. It might be really quick because the next block might be coming out soon. So you might submit it, it gets picked up, and the next block is published right then. Oh, yay, lucky you. Or you might be waiting for the next one.
So that's what you guys are saying when you try to buy a loaf of bread with Bitcoin at the grocery store, it'll take at least 10 minutes before the transaction is even in the queue to be written onto the blockchain, but not written onto the blockchain yet, but just in the queue to get, that's that distinction there.
Right. So it might get into the queue really quick, but you have to, even if you include a ton of gas, like you're basically bribing the leader, right? Hey, next leader, I really need to go get, I got to pick my kid up real quick here. I'm going to pay you $50 if you let me buy this loaf of bread, the $2 loaf of bread real fast. So you submit a $52 transaction to Bitcoin. In that inbox, the guy doing the puzzle solution, imagine it like a team. Okay. So you've got, in the Bitcoin case, you have two kids. One of them's evaluating the inbox to pick out the juicy transactions, and the other one's doing the puzzle solution, and they're a team. And this guy's like, dude, that's a $2 transaction for $50. We get paid $50 to process your $2 transaction. I'm super including that one. So they pick that out, and okay, it's going to come out in the next block, but you still got to wait for that next block. And that's just the maximum speed of Bitcoin. Now, they did it that way because they were just trying to prove the point that this can work at all. And when you're writing a system for the first time, it's very common to kind of conflate two things that are not necessarily related, and you miss the efficiencies that you could get by separating them. It's very common. So as a design principle in software, actually in engineering all over, we say the design principle is called separation of concerns. And that's exactly this. So they conflated two concerns, which is the work of updating the ledger with the work of proving who's a leader. Because their technical constraint at the time was they weren't quite sure how well a peer gossip messaging system was actually going to work. So they didn't want to have two different types of messages. They just wanted everything to go through one message type because they knew they could make that work because it's simple. So that wound up having the side effect of your transactions can't get processed on chain until the next block comes out. So you've got this like chunky nature to Bitcoin. Ethereum followed on with that. Now, Ethereum expanded the block size to some degree, and they made the interval between those blocks shorter. So it was overall much faster, but it still had a pretty low cap on how fast it could go. What we've done in our system is we're using a protocol called Bitcoin Next Generation, where you do the proof of work, similar to, well, same idea as Bitcoin, right? You do proof of work to establish who the leader is. Now we've separated that proof from so we call that the proof, we call that remember, we've got one big block in Bitcoin, right? The top part has the proof, the bottom part has all these transactions. We've broken that apart. And so now the proof part we call a key block. And a key block establishes who the leader is. The transactions part, we call those micro blocks. And micro blocks, you can have any number of them between key blocks. So you have a key block, and that says the leader is Mr. A. And Mr. A, as soon as he's affirmed as the leader, starts writing micro blocks as fast as he can. It's not actually as fast as he can. It's every 3 seconds he can publish a microblock. So everything in his inbox up to that moment, he can write into a microblock, and then at 3 seconds, he has to blast that out. And then he starts writing the next microblock. So the practical effect of that is when you submit a transaction to the mempool, so it gets gossiped around and everybody sees the transaction, the current leader, when it gets to his inbox, he can go, oh, microblock, boom, and push it out. So you might wait up to 3 seconds. So our latency is about 3 seconds. The problem with both systems in isolation is that we can process, we say 300 because we're including things like contract calls, which are very heavy. If it was just spend transactions like Bitcoin does, we could do it like a lot of those per second. Because spend transactions are very simple. It's like, oh, this from A to B update done. It's real quick. But the contract calls, you have to load the virtual machine into context. You have to get the context of this evolving state that is the contract state, and you got to pull it from all these different places and load it up, and then you've got all the state and context. Now you do the actual processing of the thing, and then you wrap it up, write the final result back to the chain, and that's it. So contract calls are heavy, like quite a bit heavier, which is why they're more expensive. So you have to pay for that complexity as a caller. Anyway, so in both cases, you have a maximum per second that you're going to get to. So in our case, let's just say heuristically, it's like 300 something, 300 to 900. Again, it depends a lot on the category of the call. Regardless, if you look at the whole world's economy, that's still, I mean, that's really like, that's plenty for most, well, like quite a few countries would actually fit inside of that. But that's still not the whole world. And it's definitely not every casual transaction. Like that's not every pay at the pump. That's not every, slice of pizza. There's no way, right? The ultimate scaling system is like cash, right? Because they don't even track anything. The proof is in the cash. That's the whole point of cash. So what happens in that case is you have mempool contention. And that's that thing I was mentioning about the $50 transaction. So Bitcoin can only do, so the theoretical top speed of Bitcoin is supposed to be around 7 per second. That's the advertised. In practice, it's about 3.2. For whatever reason, it's just like there's a flat line at about 100,000 per day. And that's just how Bitcoin's worked out. There's many more transactions submitted to the Bitcoin chain than that every day, though. And most of those are just lost to time because they're not providing enough money to motivate a miner to pick, they're not high enough on the priority queue because they're too cheap. So those just never get mined. What happens in our case is similar. We would have contention and the gas price winds up going up until the miner's picking the juicy transactions. all of this that I'm describing occurs in the context of a single chain. So just group, the proof of work chain group. The scaling system that we have is called associate chains. So you can, one chain is sufficient for, a huge number of transactions, but there's still a limit.
So,
Um,
sorry, 1 second. I'll step in here and bring you back a second, because
Okay.
there is a scaling solution within Groot, and it's called building state channels. So,
well, yeah, that's a huge one too.
okay, so within Groot itself, we can create state channels. State channels, if you think of them in a simplistic way, are a bit like when I was in DC, you could buy a card and you would swipe the card. You'd pay for the card once, you put cash onto it, and you swipe the card as you go through the machine. You can do the same thing in London, in Switzerland, where we're super advanced. You just swipe an app as you walk on and off public transport. Those are all state channels. They facilitate huge numbers of transactions between a party that you trust, like, for example, the metro network or whatever it is, and you. So it's facilitating huge numbers of very small transactions, and every single transaction is actually being recorded into the blockchain, but in a state channel first. So it essentially, it's batching in much the same way that Visa batches. Actually, Visa's number in terms of how many transactions per second they can process is about 124, I believe, transactions per second in real time. Once they get contention that starts to force that to slow, they just batch it. So they go, okay, that's fine. We're going to fill this batch here, and then we're going to start pushing them through. And when the demand goes down, we'll catch up. The real-time piece will catch up from the batch. So what we've done with state channels, and Ulf is the true master of this, state channels allow you to do a transaction with a counterparty and then have every single sub-transaction occur within that, and it be properly tracked in that way. So it's batching without batching, because every transaction is being recorded. It's just that you're doing a transaction in the first place between the two counterparties, a little bit like a charge card.
Right.
Now,
So
the limitation on that is hardware driven. So in theory, you could get to silly numbers like 50,000 transactions per second. But to give that kind of silly number context, the Tokyo subway, Tokyo metro system, which is the world's biggest of them all, that doesn't do 300 transactions per second at peak. So you get some idea of just how redundant something like that could very, very quickly be. But all of this is within the context of Groot, and Groot is an open resource layer for the world to build associate chains on infrastructure. Because one of the first things that we recognized, right back when I was first writing the papers out for this, I talked about creating networks within networks and markets within markets. This essentially is the idea. It's recognizing that every country is going to say, well, hey, if we're going to allow blockchain-based payments, and we're going to allow blockchain-based identity, all of these different things, we want it to work the way it works for us, and we want specific rules. We want to dictate who gets to be a node, who gets to confirm access, who gets to provide access. All of these things will be rule-driven, because they'll be driven by laws, they'll be driven by regulations, and those laws and regulations are specific to each jurisdiction. So the obvious answer to the question is actually, we don't think that we'll ever really stretch Groot, because the moment people start to do something that requires large numbers of transactions, it's likely that that's occurring within a single jurisdiction.
Mhm.
And that jurisdiction will want its own rules, its own supervision, its own regulations. And therefore, they can instantiate a proof of work chain of their own, which is unlikely, because if it's known actors, like it's all the country's banks, for example, setting up a national payment system, it's likely going to be a proof of stake system or a proof of authority system. Proof of stake and proof of authority allow you to operate at phenomenally high speeds, because essentially they're centralization of process. The proof of
right.
work system, now, if you thought about Groot and you said, okay, so let's say there are 10,000 channels, 10,000 associate chains, and all of them take the open source version of Groot and apply it to their own chain, albeit with some rules about what can go in and what can come out. Multiply 300 transactions per second by 10,000, and you're talking about stupid numbers of transactions that are occurring real time around the world. That's the
Right.
true answer to how you scale.
Yeah. So the case of state channels, so Groot itself, you can make a state channel, which is sort of like you and I agree that we're going to open a channel between us. I commit money to it, and like your McDonald's, for example, every time I go through the drive-through to get a coffee, we don't want to have to remember that transaction for like the life of the universe, right? So, but it gets silly. We also have lifetimes. That's a whole different discussion. It's a fallacy in blockchain in general that you can store everything forever. We'll put that to the side for now. But in state channels, if we both agree that I've bought 10 coffees in this week and you've got the money for that, we both can just sign that and save just the final state, right? We don't have to remember all the receipts in the middle, except for my accounting purposes, and we can come up with any way to do that we want. But that allows all those transactions to happen. So like a lot of the retail level transactions can occur actually on the proof of work chain without any, like, it doesn't affect scaling at all. It affects giant scale, but it doesn't affect the core blockchain's effective speed. The associate chains that Greg was talking about, the reason blockchain has to be slow at all is because of proof of work. It's solving a super hard problem, which is an adversary. Remember, keyword adversarial. In an adversarial peer network where you can't trust any other nodes, you don't trust them. They have to prove something to you for you to trust anything. In that context, picking a leader is a super hard problem, and that's what proof of work solves. Including transactions and broadcasting to a peer network, that was a solved problem a long, long time ago. But those are trustful networks. When you get to associate chains, you now have operators and they're known, which means you don't have the peer selection, you don't have the leader selection problem anymore. You have known actors, they're under legal penalty if they screw up, right? So like you can go after somebody and you have a perfect record of it on the blockchain anyway. So a misbehaving actor is under regulatory compliance burdens at that point in an associate chain. The key thing that's protected by proof of work is the money supply. When you have an associate chain, your account on Groot is the same as your account on an associate chain. So the way that you get money over there is you send money to yourself. So you do a spend transaction from you to you on a different chain. And every key block height is an opportunity for those transactions to go both ways, from Groot to an associate chain or back to Groot. If you want to go from associate chain A to associate chain B, they're both associates in the context of the Gaju. So the nearest parent, common parent for those two chains is Groot. It goes from chain A through Groot to chain B. Groot is aware of all the subordinate chains, and it ensures that more money can never be taken out of chain A or B or whatever. More money can never be taken out of an associate chain than was put in. So you have a hard cap on the circulation of the money supply. If you do shenanigans down here, if an associate chain allows sneaky stuff to happen and they're inventing and blowing up money or whatever, if people start evacuating from that chain, that whole thing collapses and there's no bailout mechanism whatsoever. So the funny money problem that you've got in the too big to fail banks, that cannot occur in the context of the Gaju. There's a hard cap to that. So we get this ability to scale with systems that we already understand today with a hard cap on the money supply ensured by proof of work in Groot. So this is all about breaking up transaction context to get massive, massive scale. Does that make sense?
Something to throw into the mix here.
Yeah, I'm with you, Susan. That's a lot to digest.
Like wash over my head.
Yeah, same.
Like, okay, it's a different language. I'm learning it.
So one of the key things that Craig spoke about there is awareness that Groot knows what's in all the associate chains. This is one of the key things that makes them associate chains, not layer twos. Layer twos and layer ones have no relationship to one another other than what they pinky promise they do. So when you do a transaction on Arbitrum, for example, which scales Ethereum, you have to wait 8 days to have it confirmed that that transaction was actually batched into Ethereum. So the way they bring the cost down is they just write all of these contractual states into the ledger, and then they put the whole thing in, just like 5,000 years ago, somebody went from the Phoenician village to the Phoenician town and had the consul in the town sign off on all the transactions that happened that week in the marketplace. It's as evolved as that. But even in that context, it's more evolved than layer twos, because layer twos, the layer one has no idea what is happening in the layer two. It is literally like a rubber stamping service for the layer two. Everything goes back to trust. And this is the true fallacy of layer twos. And this is why associate chains and layer twos are not remotely the same thing.
Right.
I think when Craig's answering that question, you're getting quite deeply into monetary theory in a way that people who haven't touched into that subject before will find a little bit alarming. But the basics of it are that Groot, the mint, creates so many Gajus in each day that are mineable. It has a life cycle over 87.5 years, 87 years remaining to get all of those Gajus minted. Once they're all minted, allowing for recoveries and burns and everything else, that's it. There are no more Gajus that are ever going to be created. It is done and dusted. So you now have a finite monetary supply, and that means that everything has a real base to be computed from. If you know, the joke I used to make to people is, how fast are you moving right now? And most people will say, well, I'm not. I'm sitting in front of you looking at you. What sort of a stupid question is that? And I say, well, actually, you're doing 28,000 kilometers an hour around the sun. You're actually moving in all sorts of directions in space, but because you lack the perspective to see it, you don't perceive it. And that's true of the monetary system as well. If the monetary system is fluid and in motion all the time, how do you know what you have or don't have? How do you know what you have is worth anything? What's a dollar? Whereas if you have a constant, now everything else can be figured out from the constant. It's like trigonometry. It's like map reading. You want to know where you're going, you have to start with where you are. Does that make it a little bit more sensible? Or digestible is the word.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad
let
you
me
recorded this. I'll watch it again.
let me ask you this. So Groot stands for Gajumaru root?
Yes.
Yes?
Correct.
Okay, so that's sort of the tap root, if you will, and these associate chains are essentially companion chains to Groot, talking to it, or sort of it's very, again, I'm trying to really dumb it down, but I'm also trying to sort of understand the relationship between, the main and then all the associates that sort of work with it or in companionship with it.
Okay, so all chains carry the Gaju as a currency, and all currencies have to have a monetary authority. So that's a root node somewhere. Oop. Now from that, you can have associates that extend and take down funds from there and can do whatever they want inside of their own context, right? So you have these little additional chains. They can have children as well. So there's a child chain. They can have children as well. And so you get a root looking structure from that. This is all in the context of the Gaju as a currency, and the top or the root node of that tree is Groot. So if I want to go from this chain to this chain with some funds, all chains recognize my account is valid on all chains. First, as we discussed earlier, first occurrence of an account on a given chain, it's instantiated there, right? So I can freely transfer my money because I signed it. So there's no funny thing can happen between chain A and chain B because I signed the transactions to go from, chain A2 to chain A1 and chain A1 back to Groot and from Groot back to B1 and to B2, right? So I can do this long chain transaction. So for example, if I live in Japan, I'm going to go on vacation in El Salvador. Well, maybe El Salvador's got its own jurisdictional issues, and maybe Japan's got its own jurisdictional issues. So if now this is assuming mass adoption of the Gaju, everything, like a lot of stuff's happening in Gajus already. We've got tons of transactions happening all over the world. I live in Japan, so I'm going to be in the whatever the Japan chain is. I want to go send my money to myself in the context of the El Salvadoran chain so that I can do business with vendors that are operating on that chain. But we're all using the Gaju. So I send money to myself from my Japan chain to the Guatemala chain. The wallet facilitates those hops for you so that you don't have to know the whole thing. That will take a couple minutes because you have to wait for key blocks to occur here. Then it hops up, another key block, another hop, another key block, another hop. So about every 2 minutes you get a hop. So that's, that's a lot faster than doing it the bank to bank way as we currently have it. But it's still slower than doing like just a quick spend at the cash register. A spend at the cash register takes about 3 seconds because remember we talked about the microblocks, right? So you're waiting for that microblock interval to have normal transactions processed within a single chain. You're waiting about 2 minutes to have a transfer between chains happen. So as that goes through Groot to get down to El Salvador from Japan, because there's not a direct route, the reason being that Groot has to guarantee to like everybody that Japan chain's not making up fake Gajus and sending them somewhere. So they need to be drawn down from the tree structure that is the Japan chain's a part of. They need to be drawn down from there and plussed up to whatever tree structure the El Salvador chain is a part of. Now, I keep saying in the context of the Gaju. That's because there's so many features to this thing that like it's hard to, you can't tell somebody everything that Gajumaru can do at once because like it doesn't work. So now that we've established this idea of trees, right? So we call this the financial authority graph. So the financial authority graph for the Gaju has its root in Groot, and that's proof of work. No human can affect that. So that's algorithmic money. You can't have. There's no wacko inflation thing there. Everything's algorithmic there. The Gajumaru also supports multiple currencies, though. So if the Japan chain, going back to our previous example, if the Bank of Japan says, hey, we really wish that we could have the yen, as we already have it, but we would like to be able to write smart contracts on chain in Sophia because that would be giving the yen a new superpower. That'd be awesome. So we want to keep our national currency. We want to keep our cash system, but we also want to be able to write smart contracts. The Bank of Japan, again, this gets into legal territory. So you have to have something other than just proof of work. You have to have this ability to work in and out of regulated spaces, right? So if the Bank of Japan says we're going to establish an associate chain in the Gajumaru, and that associate chain is going to be an associate of Groot in the context of the Gaju, but it will now be the root of the digital yen. And they make that up. And that is they have monetary authority over creation and destruction at will, as they have already, right? So it's not like a new change. They would have the same financial authority they already have over the yen, just in the digital context. What that would allow them to do is you could have your ATM or your bank service take your yen from the existing digitized money system, put it on chain. So they destroy it in the bank and they put it on chain for you. So it meant some there. Or draw that back down. You could keep the cash systems that you have. And as a vendor, you could write smart contracts and have smart contract covered transactions on chain, which now eliminates all the credit card overhead, all the compliance overhead, the CPI overhead, all that compliance nonsense that goes with taking the problem we're having right now with taking fiat payments, for example. All that goes away. You could actually still take fiat. You could have it governed by chain on chain. You could take advantage of all the things you've got with fiat and all the things that you like cash systems, which we already discussed before is that's the ultimate scaling system is cash. You can have all that you've already got, that banks are already expert in dealing with. Like we've already got all this expertise over here. Throwing it away is a little bit silly just to try to stick it to the man, right? You can have all that and you can have it work in the blockchain context by having Japan chain have two currencies instead of just one. The yen, it's the financial authority for the digital yen. it is an associate of the Gaju. And what that allows you then to do is if you establish another chain, an associate chain, it could be an associate of both the Gaju and the digital yen. So you could have associate chains extending from that. So the scaling opportunities don't stop. This also makes Forex easier because I can then buy Gajus directly on chain with my yen, transfer them through the group, and get down to El Salvador without having to have any additional routes. So it solves a really sticky Forex problem as well.
So just to add
Wait a
into
second.
this,
You're saying that like you're saying that like US dollars could be digitized on Groot?
yes.
Not on Groot, on an American associate chain. Yes, they could.
Associate chain. Wow. Yeah.
An
Well, no,
American
hold
associate
on,
chain
hold
that
on, hold on. There are two ways this can happen. So yes and yes is the answer. So number one, you can have what is called a stable coin. Stable coins are basically, we're very against them in so many ways, but
Hmm.
what they are is a wrapped set of money. So it's a pinky promise from Circle, for example, that we have all these assets that underpin our ability to say that a Ethereum wrapped smart contract dollar is the same as a dollar. So USDC, as it's called, and USDT, which is Tether, which is not even a pinky promise, it's more like a nod and a wink. They are essentially smart contracts running on an Ethereum-based system. So you could do that in Groot, that you create a smart contract form of money. Now, that is what a stablecoin is as it stands. It's a representation of a token on chain that the issuer says we pinky promise or we nod and wink is actually worth $1 because we've got those assets in the background. So on Groot, you could do that. However, that is a dumb thing to do when
Yes.
you can have an associate chain in which the Federal Reserve becomes the issuer of money, just like it is today. And all of the Federal Reserve Bank pieces around the different states of America can be the nodes on that system. And they can all say, yes, well, we will have a proof of stake system. We're all known actors. We're all known to one another, and we're going to mint money as we please. Now, the interesting thing is they're now going to have a constraint because we have a constant. The constant is Gajus. So if the US government decides that it would like to keep printing money like it's competition or Olympic sport, in which they intend to get the gold time and time again, the problem they're going to have is it's going to be very obvious that the dollar is worth less and less and less money immediately because money now is Gaju. Nothing else is money. Everything else is currency. And this is a very important distinction to make. So what you end up with is that the Gaju becomes the reference currency to everything else. This isn't obviously immediate, but within 10 years, this is going to be a reality. Within 5 years, I'm going to predict that countries will no longer have whatever ridiculous currency they have that no one believes in anyway, and everyone trades in counterfeit dollars or faked dollars. They're going to be trading in Gajus. The solution to having cash as Gajus as cash is going to come. I mean, people are already doing some of these ideas. There's a company in Germany who've been looking at this as a Geseki and something, or else I can't remember the name, Devrient or something. But there's another company in the UK who mint most of the world's cash. They actually make cash for everybody. The Swiss government has 6, and they did the Swiss, which the Swiss notes are actually plastic. So all of the point I'm getting at is you could actually instantiate cash on the Groot on Gajus using a state channel effectively because it goes in one side, it has all the operations occur in the middle, and basically you have an end point where the cash comes back into the system. This is getting more and more complex, but okay, let's take the simple. Last year at Point Zero, I met with a chap who worked for the New Zealand Reserve Bank and a person who worked for the Canadian Reserve Bank. And both of them identified a problem. The Canadians, ironically, didn't identify the ability to shut down everyone's account as a problem because they were really good at that by then. Sorry, Scott. what actually happened was they both identified that they operate within quite a cloistered banking market, and they weren't very happy about the fact that their banks had not instantiated high-speed, reliable payment rails. So the conversation we had was actually pretty interesting, that yes, you, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, could actually create such a thing, and you, the Reserve Bank of Canada, could do that too. And you could decide who within your infrastructure, your associate chain, gets to do what. In fact, you'll set all of the rules, because you may want to have a foreign currency controls. You may want to say, well, we don't really want Gajus coming in above this amount relative to the New Zealand dollar, or whatever you want. It's yours. This is the whole thing about the Gajumaru. We don't own or control your ability to do anything. So whatever you want to do, the tools are there for you to do it, to determine exactly what you want it to look like. So one of the things that we actually put into the patenting around this was that we understood that sometimes associate chains may refuse transactions. They can't just have transactions be sent to them and they have to accept it. No, they have total control. So each country is going to have a different set of requirements, different set of systems, different set of rules and applications. But the end up is that the US government could instantiate a digital form of a dollar. They can decide how much they want to control things through that dollar. They could take the EU SSR approach, which is we will give you the euro, but we will have control at all times. And if we don't like what you say on social media, guess what? No more money for you. That's the EU SSR approach. In the US, you might get a slightly more libertarian approach that says it's your money sort of ish, unless we decide you're a really bad person and, turned up to the riots on the 6th of January, for example.
That's the whole point here is that you have to have a bridge. You have to have some way to map between reality and legal fictions. And reality is nobody controls anything. We're manifest from a rule system in the world that just is. And we all have philosophies and religions about how that thing is, but the bottom line is we're here. International law is like a made up your opinion, man. Like, where's your army? Show me what your international law is. So you have this merit, kind of the law of the sea problem with when it comes to like things like gold, that there really is gold. You really can't fake it. Nobody can just blow up a star and make more. So you can make it illegal to own gold over here, but that doesn't mean that some island isn't going to say it's a free for all over here, right? So you have to have some natural mapping to that, and that's what the GROOT is. We have a paper on this that's about we have a few things written about this. That's we call this the negotiated space or the negotiable space, meaning that this is a place where you negotiate, and that negotiation comes right back down to negotiating, negotiated originalism, which is that the root of negotiation is the mutual capacity for violence. And that, based on that, you wind up establishing trust signals and society and cooperation. But when you get back down to the bottom of it, the mutual capacity for violence that's the root of negotiation. People don't like that story today because they're weird, but that is true. You come back to natural law, and if nature has one tool, it's the razor. And if you go against her too much, she'll just cut you out. So you can't ignore that. So that's what proof of work really is you've got people competing in a natural way to try to capture value from the monetary root. And that contention is what guarantees nobody can control it. However, we do live in societies, and societies are based on trust. Not everything can be trustless. We can't trust the monetary origin. That has to be like gold. That has to be something out of our hands. Nobody has imposing the moral burden on somebody to control the money supply is probably itself kind of evil, because you're foisting this horribly perverse incentive on somebody to be absolutely pure, and nobody can live up to that. So we have to take the monetary supply out of anyone's hands, out of everyone's hands. But we do have to trust each other. Every optimization in human society is actually based on trust. Trust is actually the ultimate optimization in the context of chaotic nature. I know this is getting philosophical, but these are very true, concrete points upon which monetary theory has to rest. And we can't go against that or just make up like, I'm a smart guy. You can trust me. I'll just toss society and make it all up again because it'll be perfect this time if I do it. That's ridiculous. Every society's got their own way of doing stuff. They've evolved through the ages to be whatever they are now. We can't impose a new thing on them. We can't change nature and we can't change everybody. So we have to make a system that maps to this. So you have to have a very naturalistic kind of route for money for the origins. And then you have to be able to cross into the regulatory space and say, hey, there's known actors over here. They've got rules, whatever they are. It's not up to us what those are. But within that structure, you can create rules over here that are different from rules over here. And they all communicate through that sort of Wild West crazy land that is the contentious space that is Groot. And initially, we're launching products and everything on Groot directly, but we understand that in the future, Groot is probably its main role is probably going to be interchain connections, mostly. That eventually, when you get out to these crazy scales of like everybody buying a watermelon by the road is doing it in Gaju's, well, we're not going to track all those on Groot. So it's probably going to be transactions, transfers of value from one chain to another. And most retail level transactions are going to, and especially bank to bank transactions and things are probably going to be happening in the context of regulated associate chains. And that's a natural thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
The second part of this is that, as Greg mentioned, this does put fiat currencies in direct juxtaposition with the Gaju. And that's going to have a couple of funny side effects. One is that if fiat money does have a future, it's a future inconvenience for things like cash systems. Maybe that's where that goes. I don't know. Nobody actually knows. We can't predict it and force a certain thing. It's just going to have to evolve however it evolves. The trying to never try to force things, right? It just always gets into stupid land real fast. So if they have a future, that's where that future probably rests, and that's not necessarily bad. Maybe that's a great thing. We don't know yet how it's going to go, but it does have the effect of making it so that if you do hyperinflate your currency base, it's going to be very hard to do things like play with GDP numbers in a fake way. So what happens with GDP is you say, hey, our GDP, our GDP grew by 5% last year. Meanwhile, the monetary base doubled. Did GDP really increase by 5%? Well, it increased by 5% as measured in the currency that you hyperinflated.
Mm-hmm.
But it could be a practical loss. You could have
is a practical loss.
Yeah, so you can play with it's like changing the the Curious George sketch where like he wants to go ride the roller coaster and they measure his height in licorice sticks and then all day he's like eating half of them. Like he eats them all down to like half the size. And he's like, "Oh, dude, I'm huge now. I can totally go ride the roller coaster because I'm measuring in licorice sticks, which I just shrank." So I was 5 licorice sticks this morning. Now I'm 12. I'm more than twice as tall as I was. Obviously, I can ride this now. And the dude's like, with a meter stick, he's like, dude, no, you're still short. Knock it off.
So
That's
your
what
meter
economists
stick,
do.
your meter stick is the Gaju, is what you're saying, or did
Yeah,
I?
because it's the only
Okay.
constant in the financial
Yep.
system.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
look, I think a lot of what we're talking about is obviously not immediate. You need to have broad adoption for these kind of things to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
when we've talked in the past about one of the things that the big question mark we have is if we get 1 million people into mine, then we're going to have a massive amount of excess. And the best thing we can do with that excess is actually try and create as best we can a value channel for the Gaju so that it's reasonably stable. It's not spiking up and down during the day. But the flip side is if we get 100 million people into mine, there will be no excess. It'll actually get to contention before we exit whitelist mining, which would be fantastic because we don't want to have excess. Thank you very much. It's a headache for us to then take responsibility for doing more things when we'd really like to focus on how we can make money ourselves, delivering services, products, platforms within the context of a whole new digital world. I mean, this is literally like the new world opening up in the 1500s. That's what this is. And we want to be out there with picks and shovels, not trying to figure out how we fix the law of the sea so that people are crossing between Europe and the new world in relative safety. That's essentially when, Craig touched on this earlier, that it's a bit like the old laws of the sea. How do we react? So when you're within somebody's national waters, you have to comply with their rules. When you're on the high seas, you don't. The high seas are a negotiable space. There are rules around it, which is what group does. But if we get to the
got into
100
a whole
million
bunch of
people,
stuff there. Is this making sense? I just want to make sure we're not losing people.
if we get to 100
No,
million people, then we have a global size economy right there, and that will grow and grow and grow organically to become something that does the things we're talking about.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Sorry, that was a lot. You asked like a nice little question, and we went. But
There's no test tomorrow, right?
And the recording, and that's a wrap on, I think, for one thing, it's going to be a really nice video to show people